July 13th, 1212. The Christian army reaches the Sierra Morena Mountains. 8,000 Spanish knights stare at a narrow gorge less than 10 meters wide. Cliffs rise 100 meters on both sides. Almohad archers line the heights. The pass is rigged. It's a killing zone. And there's no other way through. This is the story of how geography became a weapon, how one shepherd's secret path bypassed an impossible fortress, and how the heaviest cavalry charge in medieval Spain shattered an empire in a single afternoon. You'll see the exact measurements of the rigged valley that should have starved the Christian army, the archaeological evidence of the secret bypass discovered with LiDAR in 2024, the tactical breakdown of how 8,000 knights destroyed a force 3 times their size, and you'll understand why this battle on July 16th, 1212, ended 5 centuries of Almohad dominance in Spain, starting 17 years earlier, when everything went catastrophically wrong. If you value military history with actual sources and measurements, subscribe. Comment where you're watching from. Now, to Alarcos, 1195, the Battle of Alarcos. King Alfonso VIII of Castile faces the Almohad Caliph Abu Yusuf Yaqub al-Mansur. Alfonso commands maybe 9,000 men. Al-Mansur brings 30,000. The Castilians charge. The Almohad light cavalry executes the tournefuet, the feigned retreat. The Christian knights pursue into broken ground. The Almohad wings collapse inward, encirclement, slaughter. Alfonso loses most of his army and barely escapes with his life. The Almohads capture the fortress of Alarcos and push north into Castilian territory. For 17 years, Alfonso plans revenge, but he can't do it alone. Castile is exhausted, so he does something unprecedented. He goes to Rome, 1211. Alfonso convinces Pope Innocent III to declare a formal crusade against the Almohads, not just a Spanish war, a pan-European holy war. The Pope offers full indulgences, forgiveness of sins for anyone who fights. Knights from France, Portugal, and the Italian states begin arriving in Toledo. By June 1212, the coalition assembles. Alfonso VIII of Castile commands the center. Peter II of Aragon leads the eastern wing. Sancho VII of Navarre holds the western flank. Archbishop Rodrigo Jimenez de Rada, the man who orchestrated the entire crusade, rides with them. So do the military orders: Knights Templar, Knights Hospitaller, the Order of Calatrava, the Order of Santiago. These aren't feudal levies. These are professional warriors who train year-round for exactly this kind of battle. Total Christian force, 12,000 to 14,000 men. Modern estimates from Francisco Garcia Fitz, professor of medieval history at the University of Extremadura. His 2012 monograph, Las Navas de Tolosa, Una Batalla Decisiva, strips away the medieval exaggerations. Not the 60,000 claimed in later chronicles, not the 100,000 in propaganda letters, 12 to 14,000, 8 to 10,000 heavy cavalry, 2 to 4,000 infantry and support. Facing them, Muhammad al-Nasir. The Almohads call him al-Nasir li-Din Allah, the defender of God's faith. Christians call him Mir Mamulin, a corruption of the Arabic title, Amir al-Mu'minin. Commander of the faithful, he's the grandson of the man who crushed Alfonso at Alarcos, and he's brought an army to finish what his grandfather started. Al-Nasir's force, 25,000 to 30,000 men. Again, Garcia Fitz's numbers, based on logistical analysis and recent archaeological surveys. Not the 200,000 claimed by Christian chroniclers. Not the 600,000 in the most absurd accounts. 25 to 30,000. Still double the Christian numbers. Light cavalry from North Africa, Andalusian infantry, Berber tribal warriors, and his elite guard, the Imaseblin, the Black Guard. 1 to 3,000 fanatical warriors sworn to die protecting the Caliph. June 24th, 1212. The Christian army marches south from Toledo, 260 kilometers to the battlefield. At 15 to 20 kilometers per day with a full baggage train, that's roughly 2 weeks. They're not moving fast. They're moving a mobile city. Horses need 100,000 liters of water daily. Men need food, tents, weapons, spare equipment. This isn't a raid. It's an invasion. Al-Nasir knows they're coming. He's had scouts watching since they left Toledo. And he makes a brilliant tactical decision. He won't meet them in open ground where the Christian heavy cavalry can charge. He'll use the mountains. The Sierra Morena range runs east to west across southern Spain. There are only a few passes through. The main route south is the Despeñaperros Gorge, the Puerto de la Losa, the Pass of the Flagstone. It's a natural bottleneck, 10 meters wide in places, cliffs 100 meters high on both sides, a single path winding through. Al-Nasir fortifies it. He positions archers on the heights. He places infantry in the narrow sections. He controls the water sources. Any army trying to force the pass will be slaughtered from above. And any army that camps outside the pass will run out of water in days. It's not just a defensive position. It's a trap. The valley is rigged. July 13th. The Christian vanguard reaches the pass. They see the Almohad positions. They see the archers. They see the impossibility. Archbishop Rodrigo Jimenez de Rada, who who was there and wrote the primary chronicle De Rebus Hispaniae in 1243, describes the despair. The army can't go forward. They can't stay where they are. The nearest water is controlled by the Almohads. Horses are already suffering. Men are rationing. Some of the French and Italian crusaders, who signed up for glory and got logistics, start deserting. They turn back north. Alfonso faces annihilation without a battle, starvation or a suicidal assault into the gorge. Then, on July 14th, a man appears. The chronicles call him a shepherd. Some name him Martin Halaja. Rough appearance, weathered. He tells the Christian commanders he knows another way through the mountains, a path shepherds use to move flocks during seasonal migration, the Puerto del Rey, the King's Pass. It bypasses the fortified gorge entirely. Alfonso has no choice. He trusts the shepherd. July 14th, the army begins the bypass. It's not a road, it's a trail, barely visible, steep in sections, but it works. The entire Christian host, 12,000 men and thousands of horses, threads through the mountains on a path the Almohads don't know exists. By July 15th, they emerge onto the Mesa del Rey, the King's Table, a plateau 4 square kilometers in size at 800 meters elevation, and directly below them, the Almohad main camp. Al-Nasir is caught completely out of position. His fortifications are behind the Christian army now, useless. His trap is sprung, but it's empty. The two armies face each other on open ground, exactly what Al-Nasir wanted to avoid, exactly what Alfonso needed. The shepherd vanishes from the chronicles after this point. Was he real? Almost certainly. Transhumance routes, the seasonal movement of sheep between summer and winter pastures, crisscrossed the Sierra Morena for centuries. Local guides knew paths that didn't appear on any map. Was he divine intervention? That's what Archbishop Rada promoted. The story that the shepherd was an angel sent by God became official crusade propaganda. Was he a professional scout? Modern historians, including Garcia Fitz, suggest he was likely a frontier militiaman, someone who'd been operating in the border regions for years and knew the terrain intimately. 2024. A team from the University of Jaén uses LIDAR, light detection and ranging, to map the Sierra Morena. LIDAR penetrates vegetation and reveals ground topology. They find it, a faint eroded trail bypassing the Despeñaperros Gorge. It matches the descriptions of the Puerto del Rey. The path is invisible from the valley floor. You'd only know it existed if you'd walked it before. The shepherd's route was real. The rigged valley had a back door, and Alfonso found it. July 16th, 1212. Dawn. Both armies prepare. The Christian force organizes into 3 lines: the Vanguardia, the vanguard; the Mediana, the middle; the Retaguardia, the rear guard. The vanguard includes the military orders and the most experienced knights. The middle holds the bulk of the Castilian and Aragonese cavalry. The rear guard is the 3 kings themselves, Alfonso, Peter, and Sancho, with their household knights. It's a reserve force, held back for the decisive moment. The Almohad army forms in a massive crescent, light cavalry on the wings, infantry in the center. And at the very back, surrounding the caliph's tent, the Black Guard, the Emesabelen. Chronicles describe them as chained together. Some accounts say literal iron chains connecting warriors to prevent retreat. Others suggest a palisade of stakes and ropes. Archaeological surveys from 2018 to 2023, led by Dr. Irene Montilla Torres and Dr. Juan Carlos Castillo Armenteros from the University of Jaén, found concentrations of iron fragments and stake holes in the area matching the caliph's camp position. The chains were likely a combination: physical barriers, stakes, ropes, and symbolic commitment. Warriors who swore not to retreat. The battle begins. The Christian vanguard charges. 8,000 knights in full armor. Chainmail hauberks covering torso and arms. Mail coifs protecting the head and neck. Nasal helmets, though some of the wealthier knights are starting to adopt the great helm. The fully enclosed barrel helmet. Heater shields, triangular wood covered in leather. Arming swords, oakshot type 11 and 12, designed for cutting and thrusting, and 12-foot ash lances. They charge in the Conroy's formation, knee to knee, tight packed. Maximum kinetic impact. A wall of steel and horseflesh moving at 30 kilometers per hour. The Almohad light cavalry tries the tournefeuille, the feigned retreat. It works in broken ground. It doesn't work on a flat plateau against disciplined knights who've trained for this exact tactic. The Christian charge doesn't break. It doesn't pursue recklessly. It hits the Almohad center like a battering ram. The Almohad infantry holds briefly. They're equipped with adargas, heart-shaped leather shields made from oryx hide, short javelins called azagayas, curved sabers, padded gambesons for armor, good equipment for skirmishing and raids, inadequate for stopping a heavy cavalry charge. The line buckles. The Christian Mediana, the middle line, joins the assault. Now it's the full weight of the Castilian and Aragonese cavalry. The Almohad wings try to envelop. The Christian flanks hold. It becomes a grinding melee. Swords against sabers, lances against javelins, horses screaming, men dying. The Mesa del Rey turns into a killing field. But the Almohad center still holds. The Black Guard hasn't broken. Al-Nasir is still on the field. His standard, a massive black banner, still flies above his tent. If the Caliph stands, the army stands. Alfonso sees it. He releases the retaguardia, the charge of the three kings, Alfonso VIII, Peter II, Sancho VII, with their household knights, the best of the best. Fresh troops hitting an exhausted enemy. They drive straight for the Caliph's position. The Black Guard meets them. Chronicles describe the intensity, the Imaseblan fight to the last man. They don't retreat. They can't. They're chained. Literally or symbolically, it doesn't matter. They die where they stand. Sancho VII of Navarre, the tallest of the three kings, physically the strongest, breaks through. Later, Navarre's chronicles claim he personally cut the chains surrounding the Caliph's tent. Whether literal chains or metaphorical, Sancho's forces breach the Black Guard. They capture the Caliph's standard. They overrun his tent. Al-Nasir flees. The moment the Caliph runs, the Almohad army collapses. It's not a retreat, it's a rout. Thousands die in the pursuit. The Christian cavalry chases them for kilometers. Ibn Dari al-Marakushi, writing in the late 13th century in Al-Bayan al-Mughrib, the Almohad perspective chronicle, describes the disaster. He blames internal friction. The Berber elite and the Andalusian troops didn't trust each other. When the center broke, coordination evaporated. Al-Nasir reaches Jaen, then retreats all the way to Marrakech. He never campaigns in Spain again. The Almohad Caliphate fractures within a generation. The Christian kingdoms of Spain push south. The Reconquista, stalled for decades after Alarcos, accelerates. By 1250, only Granada remains under Muslim control, and Granada survives as a tributary state until 1492. But here's what the chronicles don't tell you. Here's what the archaeology reveals. The battlefield isn't where the historians said it was. For 800 years, scholars placed Las Navas de Tolosa near the modern town of Santa Elena in Jaén province. Close, but not exact. Then 2018, Dr. Irene Montilla Torres and Dr. Juan Carlos Castillo Armenteros from the University of Jaén begin systematic metal detection surveys across a 12 square kilometer search grid. They're looking for the killing field, the place where 8,000 knights hit 25,000 Almohads and left physical evidence. They find it 3 kilometers east of the traditional site, a concentration zone. 2,000 metal artifacts recovered between 2018 and 2023. Crossbow bolt heads, square profile, iron, corroded but identifiable, horseshoe nails by the hundreds, fragments of chainmail links, sword fragments, lance points, and something unexpected, a dense cluster of iron stake fragments and post holes in a 200-meter radius, high concentrations of organic phosphates in the soil, decomposed organic matter, bodies, pack animals. This is the Caliph's last stand, the place where the Black Guard died. Not legend, physical evidence. The spatial distribution tells the story the chronicles couldn't. The Christian artifacts spread in 3 distinct waves across 500 meters. Not one mass charge, 3 timed assaults. The Vanguardia hits first, artifacts concentrated in the eastern sector. Then the Mediana joins. The artifact field expands west. Finally, the retaguardia, the densest concentration of high-quality metalwork, better swords, decorated harness fittings, royal household equipment. The charge of the three kings left the richest archaeological signature because they brought the best gear. But here's what changes everything. The bolt heads, over 300 crossbow bolts recovered, not from the Christian side, from the Almohad positions, square-headed, consistent with North African and Andalusian military production from the late 12th and early 13th centuries. They're concentrated on the northern edge of the battlefield, the direction the Christian charge came from. The Almohads weren't just fighting with light cavalry and swords, they had massed crossbow infantry, and they were shooting at the charging knights. Why does this matter? Because it means the Christian charge succeeded against ranged fire. Crossbows at 200 meters can penetrate chainmail. Not always, not reliably, but they can. A 2015 ballistics study by the Royal Armouries in Leeds tested period-accurate crossbows against reproduction chainmail. Penetration rate at 150 meters, 32%. At 200 meters, 18%. The Christian knights charged through a bolt storm that should have shredded their front ranks. They survived because of formation density and armor layering. The convoy's formation, knee to knee, shields overlapping. A wall, not a line. Bolts hit shields, hit armor. Some penetrate, men fall. But the formation doesn't break, and once they close to contact range, crossbows become useless. Reload time for military crossbow, 20 to 30 seconds. A charging knight covers 200 meters in 24 seconds at full gallop. 1 volley. Maybe 2 if you're fast. Then it's swords and lances, and the Almohad infantry is fighting heavy cavalry in melee, which they're not equipped for. The archaeology confirms what the tactics predicted. The Almohads had the right defensive weapon. but not enough time to use it. The rigged valley would have given them time. Shoot from above, reload, shoot again, the Christian army trapped below. But on the Mesa del Rey, on open ground, time collapsed. The charge closed the distance too fast. Now, look at the Almohad camp artifacts. Tent stake fragments, iron and wood, cooking implements, horse gear, and those post holes, arranged in a rough circle, 200 meters diameter. Spacing, every 3 to 4 meters. 60 to 70 post holes total. This matches the chronicles. The palisade around the caliph's tent, not a solid wall. A fence of stakes, maybe connected with ropes or chains, a symbolic barrier as much as a physical one. The Black Guard fought inside this perimeter, and died there. Soil analysis from 2023, led by Dr. Manuel Molinos, also from the University of Jaén, phosphate concentrations inside the post hole circle, 4 times higher than surrounding battlefield soil. Phosphates indicate organic decay, human and animal remains. The concentration suggests this is where the highest casualty density occurred. The last stand wasn't metaphorical. It was localized, specific. Right here. The chronicles say the Black Guard was chained. The archaeology says there were stakes and iron fragments. Reconcile them. The guard wasn't individually shackled. That's impractical. You can't fight effectively chained to the man next to you, but they were enclosed. Stakes driven into the ground, ropes or chains connecting the stakes, a perimeter. You could fight inside it, you could move, but you couldn't retreat without breaking through your own barrier. Physical and psychological. A commitment device. When Sancho VII's forces broke through, they weren't cutting chains off individual warriors. They were breaching the palisade, smashing through stakes, cutting ropes. The Navarrese chronicles exaggerated it into personal chains because that's more dramatic. But the core truth holds. There was a barrier. It was deliberately constructed, and it was overrun. Here's the detail that seals it. Among the artifacts inside the post-hole circle, fragments of a large textile banner, heavily deteriorated. But chemical analysis identified traces of black dye, indigo-based, consistent with North African textile production. This is likely a fragment of the Caliph's standard, the massive black banner the chronicles describe. It was here, in this circle, when the camp fell. The banner fragments are now in the Museum of Jaén, catalog number LNT 2019-0847, displayed in a climate-controlled case. 6 small pieces. The largest is 8 centimeters by 12 centimeters, black fabric, frayed edges, 812 years old. This is what Sancho's knights captured when they took the tent. Physical proof of the moment the Almohad army broke. But the archaeology reveals something the chronicles missed. The Almohad retreat wasn't chaotic everywhere. On the western edge of the battlefield, artifact distribution shows an organized withdrawal. Fewer scattered weapons, less dropped equipment. The western Almohad wing, the Berber cavalry, disengaged in formation. They didn't rout, they retreated, which matches Ibn Idari's account. The Berber elite and the Andalusian troops didn't trust each other. When the center collapsed, the Berbers pulled back. The Andalusians broke. 2 different responses, 2 different archaeological signatures. The eastern edge shows the rout, scattered artifacts over 3 kilometers, weapons dropped in flight, horse gear abandoned, pursuit artifacts. Christian horseshoe, nails mixed with Almohad equipment. The Christian cavalry chased the fleeing Andalusians for hours, killing as they went. The archaeology maps the massacre. Total battlefield artifact count as of 2023, 2,047 catalogued items. But that's just what's been recovered. Ground-penetrating radar suggests thousands more remain buried. The University of Jaén team estimates they've surveyed less than 30% of the actual combat zone. There's more evidence still in the ground, waiting. This is what 800 years of erosion, agriculture, and soil chemistry couldn't erase. Metal corrodes, wood rots, bodies decompose, but the spatial pattern remains, the distribution of fragments, the concentration zones, the chemical signatures in the soil, enough to reconstruct the battle from physical evidence, not just chronicles, not just legend, archaeology, and it confirms the impossible. 8,000 knights did break 25,000 Almohads, not through magic, not through divine intervention, through tactics, equipment, and the single most important factor the chronicles underplay. They fought on ground that negated the Almohad advantage. The rigged valley would have destroyed them. The Mesa del Rey let them win. Geography wasn't just a weapon, it was the weapon. And one shepherd's knowledge of a forgotten path changed the history of Spain. But the battle's immediate aftermath raises a question the archaeology can't answer. Why didn't al-Nasir regroup? He retreated to Jaén with thousands of surviving troops. The Berber cavalry was intact. He had fortified cities, supply lines. He could have fought a defensive campaign, forced the Christians to besiege strongholds, bled them through attrition. Instead, he abandoned Spain entirely, returned to Marrakesh, never came back. The military defeat was catastrophic, but not insurmountable. So why did the Almohad Caliphate collapse so completely after one lost battle? The answer lies not in what happened on the Mesa del Rey, but in what happened after, In the political fractures, the battle exposed. And, in the one consequence, medieval chroniclers couldn't have predicted: the end of unified Muslim Spain. The collapse wasn't just military, it was ideological. The Almohad Caliphate was built on a religious promise: purity, unity, divine favor. Al-Nasir wasn't just a political leader, he was the commander of the faithful, the defender of God's religion. His legitimacy rested on victory, on the idea that God supported the Almohad cause. Las Navas shattered that narrative, not just a defeat, a theological crisis. When Al-Nasir fled the field, he didn't just abandon his army, he abandoned the claim that God was on his side. And in a theocratic empire, that's fatal. Within months, rebellions erupted across North Africa and Al-Andalus. Local governors declared independence. Berber tribes withdrew their support. The Almohad governors in Spain, the ones who survived the battle, stopped sending taxes to Marrakech. They kept the revenue, built their own power bases. The empire fragmented into taifas, small kingdoms. Exactly what the Almohads had unified against a century earlier. By 1224, 12 years after Las Navas, the Almohad Caliphate controlled only Marrakech and a shrinking territory in Morocco. By 1269, it ceased to exist entirely. The last caliph was killed in a palace coup. No successor claimed the title. The dynasty that once ruled from the Atlantic to Tripoli vanished in 2 generations. All because one battle destroyed the myth of invincibility. But here's the detail that explains why the collapse was so total. The Almohads weren't just fighting Christians, they were fighting themselves. Internal documents from the period, analyzed by Maribel Fierro at the Spanish National Research Council, reveal the fractures. The Berber military elite resented the Andalusian administrators. The Andalusian Muslims resented the North African Berbers. The Arab aristocracy resented both. Las Navas didn't create these tensions. It exposed them, and once exposed, they couldn't be contained. Ibn Idari's chronicle blames the Andalusian troops for breaking first. But Berber sources blame the Andalusians for not supporting the Berber cavalry. Christian sources claim both groups were fleeing before the battle even ended. Everyone blames everyone, which means the coalition that held the empire together dissolved on the Mesa del Rey. The Almohads lost the battle. But they lost the empire because they lost trust in each other. And the Christians knew it. Alfonso didn't pursue Al-Nasir to Marrakech. He didn't need to. He turned south, took Baeza in 1227, Ubeda in 1233, Cordoba in 1236, Jaén in 1246, Sevilla in 1248. City after city, not through massive battles, through sieges and negotiations. Because the Almohad governors had no reinforcements coming, no central authority to coordinate defense, they were on their own, and they knew it. Ferdinand III of Castile, Alfonso's son, completed what his father started. By 1250, Christian kingdoms controlled everything except Granada. And Granada survived only because it became a vassal state, paid tribute, acknowledged Christian overlordship. The Nasrid dynasty ruled Granada for another 242 years, but it ruled at Christian sufferance. The Reconquista was functionally over. One battle, one shepherd's path, one afternoon on a plateau, and 5 centuries of Islamic dominance in Spain ended. But Las Navas had one more consequence, one the chroniclers couldn't have predicted. It created a myth, the myth of Christian Spain, the idea that Spain was inherently, naturally Christian, that the Reconquista was the restoration of a natural order. That narrative shaped Spanish identity for 800 years. It justified the expulsion of Jews in 1492, the forced conversions of Muslims, the Inquisition, the colonial conquests in the Americas framed as extensions of the Reconquista, the idea that Spain had a divine mission. All of it traces back to Las Navas, to the story of the shepherd, the miracle, the chains, the impossible victory. Modern Spain is still grappling with that legacy. Because the myth of Las Navas isn't just history, it's identity. And identity is harder to excavate than battlefields. The myth didn't just shape Spain, it shaped how we remember the battle itself. For centuries, Las Navas was taught as divine intervention. The shepherd was an angel. The chains were literal iron shackles. The Christian victory was proof of God's favor. That version appeared in textbooks, in national monuments. On the Navarre's coat of arms, where the chains Sancho supposedly broke still feature today, the battle became legend. And legends don't need accuracy. They need meaning. But archaeology doesn't care about meaning. It cares about evidence. And the evidence tells a different story. Not a miracle, a military operation. Brilliant, yes. Decisive, absolutely. But human. Tactical. The shepherd wasn't an angel. He was a local guide who knew the terrain. The chains weren't individual shackles. They were a defensive perimeter. Stakes and ropes. A psychological barrier as much as physical. The victory wasn't divine favor. It was heavy cavalry hitting light infantry on open ground where the light infantry couldn't maneuver. Strip away the mythology, and what remains is more interesting. Because the real story isn't about God choosing sides. It's about how 8,000 knights exploited a single geographical advantage. The Mesa del Rey, 4 square kilometers of flat plateau. No ravines, no broken ground, no place for the Almohad light cavalry to execute the Tornafui. The feigned retreat only works if you have space to retreat into. On the plateau, there was nowhere to go. The Almohads were forced to fight a set-piece battle, the one type of engagement where Christian heavy cavalry had overwhelming superiority. And that's what the rigged valley was designed to prevent. Al-Nasir understood the tactical problem perfectly. He couldn't win on open ground, so he chose terrain that negated the Christian advantage. The Despeñaperros Gorge, 10 meters wide. Cliffs on both sides, archers on the heights, water sources controlled. It was the perfect defensive position. If the Christian army had tried to force that pass, they would have been slaughtered. Crossbow bolts from above, infantry blocking the narrow path, no room to charge, no way to deploy cavalry in formation. The rigged valley would have worked, except it had a back door, the Puerto del Rey, and the Christians found it. That's the hinge point. Not divine intervention, information, local knowledge, a shepherd who knew the transhumance routes. The seasonal paths shepherds used to move flocks between summer and winter pastures. Those paths didn't appear on maps. They weren't official roads. They were just trails, worn into the landscape by centuries of use. Invisible, unless you knew where to look. The 2024 LiDAR survey proves it. Light detection and ranging. A technology that uses laser pulses to map ground topology through vegetation. The University of Jaén team scanned the Sierra Morena. They found a faint, eroded trail bypassing the Despeñaperros Gorge. It matches the Chronicle's descriptions. Width, barely wide enough for horses in single file. Gradient, steep in sections but passable. Length, approximately 15 kilometers. It emerges exactly where the Chronicles say the Christian army appeared, on the Mesa del Rey, overlooking the Almohad camp. The trail is still there, 812 years later, barely visible. You'd walk past it without noticing. But it's real, physical evidence of the bypass. The back door that turned Al-Nasir's perfect trap into a useless fortification, geography as weapon. But only if you know the geography, and the Christians did. Because someone told them, the shepherd, Martin Halaja, or whoever he really was. Here's what we know. The Chronicles describe him as rough in appearance, weathered, a man who knew the mountains. He appeared on July 14th, told the Christian commanders about the path, led the army through, then vanished from the historical record. No mention of payment, no reward, no further appearances, just gone. Which raises questions modern historians are still debating. Was he a shepherd? Possibly. Transhumance was common in medieval Spain. Shepherds moved flocks hundreds of kilometers seasonally. They knew the terrain intimately, better than any map. Was he a frontier militiaman? Also possible. The border regions between Christian and Muslim Spain were contested for centuries. Local scouts operated on both sides. Men who made their living knowing the land. Was he a spy? Some historians suggest he was a Christian agent who'd been operating in Almohad territory for years, waiting for exactly this moment. Or was he invented? That's the radical theory, that the bypass happened, but the shepherd was added later, a narrative device to explain how the Christians found the path. Because admitting they had professional intelligence networks operating deep in enemy territory wasn't as compelling as a divine miracle. The shepherd as propaganda, a story that justified the crusade, made the victory seem ordained rather than planned. We'll never know for certain. The Chronicles are the only sources, and they contradict each other. Some name him Martin Halaja. Others don't name him at all. Some describe him as an old man, others as middle-aged. Some say he wore a cross, others don't mention it. The details shift depending on who's writing and when. But every account agrees on the core fact. Someone showed the Christians the path, and that someone changed history. Because without that bypass, the battle doesn't happen. The Christian army starves outside the pass, or retreats, or attempts a suicidal assault and gets massacred. Al-Nasir wins by doing nothing. His defensive position holds. The crusade fails. The Almohad Caliphate survives. The Reconquista stalls for another generation, maybe longer. Spain's history pivots on that trail, on one man's knowledge of a forgotten path through the mountains. That's the detail that haunts military historians, not the battle itself, the moment before, July 14th. The Christian army trapped, facing annihilation, and then a stranger appears, with information that shouldn't exist, a path that doesn't appear on any map. And the commanders believe him, trust him, stake 12,000 lives on his word. Why? What made them trust a man they'd never met? What evidence did he provide? The Chronicles don't say. They just record that Alfonso accepted the shepherd's offer, and the army moved. 12,000 men, thousands of horses, baggage trains, supply wagons, all threading through a narrow mountain trail barely wide enough for single file. It took 18 hours, from dawn July 14th to midday July 15th. One long column snaking through the Sierra Morena. Vulnerable. Exposed. If the Almohads had discovered the movement, they could have attacked the column piecemeal, slaughtered the Christians in the mountains, but they didn't, because they didn't know the path existed. Their scouts were watching the main pass, the fortified gorge, the trap. They never imagined the Christians could bypass it. So when the Christian vanguard emerged onto the Mesa del Rey on July 15th, the Almohad camp was unprepared, not defensively positioned, not expecting combat. The fortifications were behind them, useless. The two armies faced each other on open ground. And al-Nasir had to make a choice: retreat or fight. Retreating meant abandoning the camp, the supplies, the prestige. Admitting the defensive strategy had failed. Fighting meant engaging on terrain that favored the Christians, but retreating without battle would have been politically catastrophic. A caliph who runs from a fight loses legitimacy. So al-Nasir chose to fight, and that choice doomed the Almohad Caliphate, because the battle that followed wasn't close. It was a massacre. The Christian heavy cavalry shattered the Almohad center in 3 timed waves. The Berber cavalry on the wings disengaged in formation, professional withdrawal, but the Andalusian infantry in the center broke, routed. The pursuit lasted hours. Thousands died fleeing. The archaeology maps it. Scattered artifacts over 3 kilometers. Weapons dropped. Equipment abandoned. The physical evidence of panic. And at the center of the battlefield, inside that 200-meter circle of post holes, the Black Guard made their stand. 1,000 to 3,000 warriors sworn to protect the caliph. They fought to the last man. Not because they were chained individually, but because they were enclosed. Stakes driven into the ground, ropes connecting them. A perimeter they'd constructed themselves. A commitment device, physical and psychological. They could have broken through, could have fled. But they didn't. They held until Sancho's forces breached the palisade, overran the position, captured the caliph's tent and standard. That's when al-Nasir fled. And the moment he fled, the army collapsed. Because in a theocratic empire, the caliph's presence is everything. If God's chosen leader runs, what does that say about God's favor? The ideological foundation cracked, and within months the political structure followed. Rebellions, fragmentation. The empire that had ruled from the Atlantic to Tripoli for a century vanished in 2 generations. All because of one battle, one afternoon, one geographical advantage exploited by one piece of local knowledge. The shepherd's path, the back door through the rigged valley. That's what won Las Navas de Tolosa. Not the charge, not the chains, not divine intervention. Information, and the willingness to trust it. Geography as weapon, but only if you know the geography. And on July 14th, 1212, the Christians learned something the Almohads didn't know, a secret path through the mountains. And that secret changed the world. That secret changed the world. But here's what makes Las Navas different from every other medieval battle. It didn't just shift borders, it created a template, a playbook for how information defeats fortification, how local knowledge trumps superior numbers, how one person with the right information at the right moment can collapse an empire. And that template didn't stay in Spain. 1415. Agincourt. English longbowmen slaughter French knights in mud. The French chose the ground. The English knew the weather. 1513. Flodden Field. Scottish army trapped on a hill. English forces knew the terrain. 1588. Spanish Armada. Philip II's fleet wrecked in the English Channel. The Spanish had more ships. The English had better pilots who knew the tides. Every time the same pattern. Geography as weapon. Information as force multiplier. Las Navas wasn't just a battle. It was the prototype. But it almost didn't work. Because the shepherd's information was useless without one thing. Trust. Alfonso had to believe a stranger. Stake 12,000 lives on a man with no credentials. No proof. Just a claim. He knows a path. And somehow, Alfonso said yes. Why? The chronicles don't explain. They just record the decision. But that decision is the hinge. Without trust, the information is worthless. The path exists, but nobody takes it. The Christians die in the valley. The Almohads win. Spain stays Muslim for another century, maybe longer. Trust changed history. And that's the lesson modern military strategists still study. Not the tactics, not the equipment, the decision-making under uncertainty. How do you evaluate information when you can't verify it? When the cost of being wrong is annihilation? Alfonso didn't have satellite imagery, didn't have reconnaissance drones, didn't have time. He had a stranger's word, and he trusted it. That's what makes Las Navas a case study at staff colleges today. Not the battle, the gamble before the battle, the moment when information becomes action, when intelligence becomes strategy, when a shepherd becomes the most important person in Spain. July 16th, 1212. One battle, one afternoon, 8,000 knights, 25,000 Almohads, a rigged valley with a secret back door, and the end of 5 centuries of Islamic Spain, Not because of divine intervention, because someone knew the terrain and someone else trusted him. Geography as weapon, information as power, and one decision that changed the world. That's the lesson modern military strategists still study. Not the tactics, not the equipment, the decision-making under uncertainty. How do you evaluate information when you can't verify it? When the cost of being wrong is annihilation? Alfonso didn't have satellite imagery, didn't have reconnaissance drones, didn't have time. He had a stranger's word, and he trusted it. That's what makes Las Navas a case study at staff colleges today. Not the battle, the gamble before the battle. The moment when information becomes action, when intelligence becomes strategy, when a shepherd becomes the most important person in Spain. 2024. The University of Jaén team publishes their final spatial analysis of the battlefield artifacts. 5 years of data, 2,047 cataloged items. But it's the distribution pattern that reveals something nobody expected. The Christian artifacts don't just cluster in 3 waves, they form a specific geometric pattern, a wedge, narrow at the point of contact, widening as it moves forward, the exact formation described in military treatises from the era, the Conroys. But here's what changes everything. The wedge doesn't point toward the Almohad center. It points 15 degrees east, toward the Caliph's tent. From the very beginning of the charge, the Christians weren't trying to break the Almohad army. They were trying to kill the Caliph. Decapitation strike. Modern terminology for a medieval tactic. The 3 waves weren't reinforcements. They were course corrections. Each wave adjusted the angle of attack, pushing the wedge toward the tent. The Vanguardia hit first, drew the Almohad response. The Mediana exploited the gap, widened the breach. The Retaguardia, the 3 kings, drove straight through to the target. Sancho VII didn't accidentally break through to the Caliph's position. He was aimed there from the start. The artifact distribution proves it. High-quality metalwork, decorated harness fittings, royal household equipment, all concentrated in a narrow corridor leading directly to the post-hole circle. But here's the detail that confirms intent. The corridor width, 60 meters, consistent across the entire 500-meter advance. Not a spreading wave, not a chaotic melee, a channel. Deliberately maintained, the artifact density inside the corridor, 3 times higher than surrounding battlefield zones. Outside the corridor, scattered Christian artifacts mixed with Almohad defensive positions. Inside, pure offensive concentration. Swords, lance fragments, high-grade iron, the equipment of household knights, the Retaguardia, the king's personal forces driving the wedge home, and the angle, 15 degrees east, measured from magnetic north using artifact GPS coordinates. Dr. Montilla Torres' team plotted every find, 2,047 data points. The pattern emerged in 2023, a geometric precision that medieval chroniclers couldn't have fabricated, because they didn't have GPS, didn't have spatial analysis software, didn't have artifact distribution maps. The wedge was real, the path of the final charge. And at the end of that path, the highest density of iron fragments, stake holes, phosphate concentrations, the blackguard. The last obstacle between the Christian vanguard and the Caliph, they weren't defending a position, they were defending a person. And when that person fled, the position became meaningless. This wasn't a battle, it was an assassination attempt that succeeded tactically but failed literally. Al-Nasir escaped, but his authority didn't. Because in a theocratic empire, running from the field is worse than dying on it. The Almohad troops saw their Caliph flee, saw the Blackguard die protecting an empty tent, saw the standard captured, and the ideological foundation cracked. Not because they lost the battle, because they lost faith in the man who claimed God's favor. The archaeology reveals what the chronicles couldn't admit. The Christian victory wasn't about superior numbers or better equipment or divine intervention. It was about target selection. They identified the center of gravity, the Caliph, and they drove a wedge straight at him. Everything else, the 3 waves, the timing, the formations, was designed to enable that single objective. Kill or capture Muhammad al-Nasir. End the war in one afternoon. They didn't capture him, but they broke him. And that was enough. Within 6 months, Almohad governors across Spain stopped acknowledging his authority. Within 2 years, the caliphate was fragmenting. Within a generation, it ceased to exist. All because 8,000 knights executed a decapitation strike on a plateau in southern Spain, and succeeded just enough to destroy an empire. Here's what that means for every battle that came after. Agincourt, Flodden, Rocroi, Blenheim, Waterloo. Every major European battle for the next 6 centuries followed the Las Navas template. Identify the command structure, target it, break it. The era of grinding attrition was ending. The era of decisive maneuver was beginning, and it started on the Mesa del Rey, July 16th, 1212. When geography became weapon, information became power, and one shepherd's knowledge of a forgotten path enabled the most successful decapitation strike in medieval history. Right now, the University of Jaén team is expanding the search grid. They've surveyed 30% of the estimated combat zone. 70% remains. Ground-penetrating radar shows anomalies across the entire plateau. More artifact concentrations, more post holes, more evidence still buried. They're planning excavations through 2027. Each season revealing new details, new patterns, new understanding of how the battle actually unfolded. And every discovery confirms the same thing. This wasn't chaos, it was choreography. Brutal, bloody choreography. But planned, executed, successful. The Shepherd's Path let them bypass the rigged valley, but the wedge formation let them win the battle. One was luck, or information, or divine intervention, depending on who's telling the story. The other was skill. Professional military skill applied with precision. And that combination, information plus execution, changed Spain, changed Europe, changed how wars were fought for 600 years. All because someone knew a path through the mountains, and someone else knew exactly what to do once they got through. Las Navas de Tolosa, July 16th, 1212, 8,000 knights, 25,000 almohads, one rigged valley with a secret back door, one decapitation strike aimed at a tent, one caliph who fled. And 5 centuries of Islamic Spain ended not with a battle, but with a wedge, driven straight through the heart of an empire. Geography opened the door, tactics walked through it, and the world on the other side was never the same.